It's very warm this July afternoon, and I'm at a place I've not been for a while, because this is the beautiful Worksop Priory. It's a fabulous old priory set right in the centre of the town of Worksop. Now, while the building is absolutely beautiful and very old, a lot of the people that frequent the area and walk through the grounds here aren't so nice and sociable. So I'm not going to be long doing this introduction, only to say that I'm here for the first survey for Leiobunum species A of 2022. Now, Leiobunum species A, what exactly is it? You may well be asking if you're of an inquisitive nature. Well, it's a new Harvestman, or relatively new Harvestman, to the UK and indeed to Europe a few years prior to it being found in the town of Worksop. Now, it first turned up in Europe all of a sudden in 2004 and pretty much rampaged throughout the European continent over the next few years. Now, the first Nottinghamshire record and UK record was about half a mile from where I'm stood now, and it was a specimen found on a house wall on the Prospect estate that Dilys and myself found in 2009. It was confirmed as being the unnamed Leiobunum species A. Apparently a species that is still yet to be scientifically named. No one can determine the origin of this really long-legged and large Harvestman. Now, after that first record, Dilys and I spent a lot of time searching various factory walls and house walls in the Worksop area, trying to find another specimen, because the specimen that we found originally was a male. It was 3 years later, and just a few days after Paul Richards had found Leiobunum species A in Barnsley, that Dilys and I found Leiobunum species A again here on the walls of Worksop Priory, and that was 3 years to the day in 2012. Since then, we came here every year to monitor the species, and we watched the numbers grow over the periods of time. Now, last year was a poor year. I don't think I even managed 50 specimens, but it had been increasing year on year. But it has now been starting to be found away from Worksop Priory. It is right very much in the centre of Worksop itself, and also in B&Q. Now, today I've been looking, a quick look under these lips and ridges here. It tends to get in the cracks where these columns are on the side. It loves those and it will tuck itself in. In fact, I can see one as I stand here now. There's also a cluster of them in that doorway. Now, the interesting thing about Leiobunum species A is that year on year they form fairly large aggregates, one of which you're going to see because I've just seen one here, but they're always in the same spot on the walls of Worksop Priory, and that's year on year. So I'll best show you one of these fantastic Harvestmen. They are incredibly long-legged, much longer in proportion than any other UK species that you're likely to find. They're very similar to a species, Leiobunum sp.A, I believe it's called, which is largely a species in Scotland. This is very similar, and the legs can attain a 6-inch leg span quite easy in mature specimens, but they are beautiful Harvestmen, but incredibly long-legged. It's nice that we've got an aggregation, and this is what they're known for, but most Leiobunum species will form aggregations, especially Leiobunum rotundum, which is a native species to the UK, that will form aggregations in similar circumstances and situations to Leiobunum species A here. Those congregations and aggregations will remain tight balls. Upon disturbance, though, that ball erupts in a mass of legs. but after a few minutes they start to reform that aggregation. You'll see that a couple that are on the periphery on the right hand side of the house just starting to make tentative moves back into the group. There obviously must be some communal communication between these. See that one there just on the edge of the screen now. This one's right on the right hand side of the screen is just starting to nudge its way in, as is that one towards the bottom of the screen. They are quite an amazing species. Now there's a few other records in Nottinghamshire. They were found in one of Nottinghamshire suburb, I think it might have been Nuttall or Bramcote Way, and also been found at a garden centre near Southwell, and it was just a single specimen. It's clearly elsewhere in Nottingham. It must be in Nottingham. This is a species that you want to look for in urban areas, on any situation, on shop walls. I say it does occur right in the very centre of Worksop itself, right in amongst the shops. It's nice to see a graveyard like this, even nice when it's in the middle of a major town. Burials have long since stopped here at Worksop Priory, but it is left and managed with a view to wildlife. It always has been, as far as I've been aware. And while this half that I'm standing in now has been cut, that half has been left untouched. So the invertebrates that were in this, the butterflies that were flying around here before it was cut, are now in there. And there's most, if not all, of the browns that you would expect, species like meadow browns and gatekeeper, and there's certainly a number of ringlets knocking around there and small skippers. It's how graveyards should be. It's just a shame that the Priory suffers from being where it is. Now, thankfully, there's very little signs of vandalism here, but there is a drug problem from a certain element of society which lives in the area close by, and unfortunately they tend to walk and cut through here on the way to get the next fix, and that's being quite honest. There's no good me hiding it. And sometimes when you come and visit to look for Leiobunum sp.A, or should you come to look for anything, because it is well worth a walk around, you can sometimes be verbally accosted by the more dubious members of society. Saying that, it is rare, and you can usually see the troublemakers from a distance, so you know that you can avoid them. But this has been a great place for invertebrates. I say Leiobunum sp.A for many years. This was only the second site in the UK for it. But in Nottinghamshire, this very graveyard also produced the first Nottinghamshire record of the tiny green spider Nigma walkenaria, and Dilys and I found that on some privet and ivy growing on the tombstones just over there. Graveyards are wonderful places. They might be full of dead people, but the dead can't hurt you. It's a super building, kind of building that you don't expect from Worksop. It wasn't until I started working occasionally in Worksop that I even knew the existence of Worksop Priory, and it is a beautiful building. The gatehouse is probably even older, it certainly seems it, but now that is somewhere you don't want to go, because unfortunately it's treated just like a public toilet and there's lots of drug activity. Yet it's a beautiful old building, really ought to be fenced off. But there's a number of other species of harvestmen that can occasionally be found on the walls of Worksop Priory. There's Apilio peritinus, and a Pilio canistrini, but any other harvestmen found here are always just singles and just very small numbers, even on counts from the whole of the walls. The second most commonest really is probably a Pilio peritinus. Occasionally can tuck itself in with Leiobunum species A. Dicranopalpus ramosus, which is another species relatively new to the UK and an invasive species that occasionally turns up, but it's the place to come to see Leiobunum species A, a harvestman with a leg span like that. Huge things, small bodied, enormous long legs. But it's just nice to come and look at the priory itself if you've not seen it. Some nice flowers at the front that seem thankfully to get relatively untouched, and some beautiful mature trees here in the grounds. It's well worth popping in, especially if you want to see the big harvestman. Now I've just come back to revisit this group, and I've just covered, I'll show you how far down in a minute. I just want to show you a few that's under a doorway, which is one of the traditional sites for Leiobunum species A, but the total I've got is 90, which is far and above anything last year. It seems as though last year they must have had a bad year. This year looks like it's going to be a good one. There's individuals sort of spread out, but there's several aggregations like this one, and these have got one or still two molts to go yet. We're still in towards the middle of July. Some have got at least double the size to go yet. I have lots of fond memories of Dilys and I counting and surveying for Leiobunum species A on the walls of Worksop Priory, and in fact this is the 10th year that I've done it. Doesn't seem like 10 years since we've refound Leiobunum species A on the walls of the Priory here in October 2012, 3 years after our original first for the UK record of Leiobunum species A from that Prospect Estate house back in 2009. That started it all off. It's interesting, the numbers. We thought we'd have seen the numbers gradually rise over the time here, and indeed they did, but it's been a bit hit and miss. Say last year was very poor, and although there was some build-up of numbers here, I think that the population had been expanding outwards from here into other parts of Worksop for a number of years. I mean, it is now in the middle of Worksop, as already mentioned, and at B&Q. In fact, I might go and call in a B&Q on the way home just to see whether any's on the wall there again. Found them there last year. But at least we've got 10 years data. No other county in the country can say that for any site. And it was nice to find a new invertebrate for the UK all those years ago, just on the outside of a house in sunny old Worksop. Not the kind of place you'd go to find a first for the UK, but 10 years later I'm still looking for it, and hopefully that'll carry on. And we'll see how the numbers fare over the rest of this summer and autumn.